Hey guys, Matthew, and welcome to another episode of the State of Path of Exile, or State of Exile is I think what I'm actually going to go for the name of the series. Yesterday I made a video called Crafting is Dead, and I gave some examples, and a lot of people have basically been talking about this and responding to the video and saying a couple of things. A lot of people are agreeing with it, but there's also a large amount of people who are essentially saying, well, I'm a casual, or I'm a new player, or I never understood how to craft, so this doesn't affect me, whatever, game doesn't change, right? And there's also some people who are basically saying, oh, well, these are only specific examples to like +2 amulets. Doesn't mean that the entirety of crafting is dead. And to be honest, I agree that the examples that I chose may not have been the absolute best. I wanted to showcase examples where the craft or the cost of the craft was going to be significantly higher than before. For example, when it comes to +2 amulet, we're looking at essentially 10 times more expensive than it used to be in terms of meta mods. And of course, whatever the price of the augment is, that is going to be equivalent, if you will, because at the end of the day, whatever the price of the augment, you're going to need one single augment. But the price of the meta mods goes from needing cannot roll attack mods once, and that's it. That's all you needed with full suffixes, to essentially needing multi-mod, prefixes not be changed, cannot roll attack mods. And then another difference is because these are 3 suffixes which you need to multi-mod after you actually augment and get your second +1. So let's say you had life +1 all and then +1 cold or something after you augment cold. Then you're left with 3 empty suffixes where the only thing you can realistically do is multi-mod. And multi-modding, well, there's not really any good stats that you can multi-mod on an amulet. The resistance modifiers are pretty low. The attributes modifiers are pretty low. You can't get critical strike multiplier from the benchcraft either. There's really not a whole lot of good suffixes on amulets. So that's why I use that as an example. Another example that I use is essentially Awakener Orb being 2 prefixes or 2 suffixes. Now, for those who don't know, and a lot of people are saying, why can't you just beastcraft? You know, let's say you do 2 suffixes, you have an open suffix, and 3 prefixes. Can't you just beastcraft minus prefix plus suffix so that you open up a prefix slot so they can work on your prefixes by locking your suffixes and scouring or veiled chaos or whatever it is, right? Well, yes, but a lot of people don't know that there's actually a bias towards the amount of modifiers that are prefixes or suffixes when you awaken or orb 2 of the same modifier type. If you awaken or orb 2 suffixes together, the odds of getting a 3rd suffix is significantly higher than if you awaken or orb a prefix and a suffix. And that means that most of the time, if you awaken or orb 2 suffixes, you're going to end up with a dead suffix most of the time. Now, not every single time. So sometimes, if that was to happen, where you'd have an open suffix and then 3 prefixes, you could do the beast crafting method minus prefix plus suffix to essentially save whatever you've invested so far into your craft. But this is drastically different than what we used to be able to do. Now, the way that we used to be able to do it before is if you awaken or orb 2 suffixes and then you had a 3rd suffix that was empty, we could craft on multi-mod to act as a block so that we wouldn't be able to add any other random suffix which we didn't want. And this was very useful in some cases to potentially try to just exalt slam a final mod or potentially augment influence or a million different things that you could do, or you just basically let it open, and then when you reforge, you are essentially just going to be giving a random 3rd suffix, which is going to be better than absolutely nothing. But now, in today's video, I want to talk about why crafting is actually dead in a way and using something that a lot more people are going to understand. The single most important craft when it comes to actual crafting that we used to have from Harvest, which was removed, is reforge an item keeping prefixes or keeping suffixes. Now, the reason for that is that essentially created a save spot, a save point, to how much investment you had put into the item at that certain point. Now, I've made a lot of build guides over the years, and a lot of my build guides, whenever I include a POB, which has crafted items, I actually include a step-by-step crafting guide to multiple of the items, right? So, for example, in my General Cry build guide, I included a full guide on how to craft the body armor and the boots, which were both rare items that were deterministically craftable, if you will. Now, all of this is essentially rendered useless. I also made a community crafting sheet, which also was available to anybody who had who was there when we made it, or who knew where to find it, if you will. But the community crafting sheet was essentially utilizing the new the new tool on Path of Exile, which was the simulator, which allowed you to essentially completely simulate any given craft using the Crangulator 2000 or whatever it was called. And it was a really, really cool project. but it was put on hold after Arch Nemesis because, of course, in Sentinel League we had access to Recombinators, so there was no reason to ever look back on this project. And now that Harvest is completely gone, there's also no reason to go back to this project. But we had still, as a community, made a few of these crafts, and the idea was to build a library of all the crafts, which was going to be available to anybody. It was completely free, and the goal was just to help people craft their own items instead of having to go out and buy them for typically, more than what it would cost to craft them themselves, right? All of this is rendered useless because of the simple fact that they removed Reforge keeping prefixes or Reforge keeping suffixes. Now, why is that? Right? Most endgame items are made by essentially getting either prefixes done and suffixes done. One or the other. You're going to focus on that, and then you're going to focus on the other one deterministically using Harvest. For example, let's talk about a pair of boots. So let's see if I have a pair of boots in here. Right. So let's talk about a pair of boots with Elevated, Tailwind, Onslaught, and Elusive. Right? The way that you would craft this is essentially you would Awakener Orb, Tailwind, and Onslaught, right? This would give you 2 suffixes. Now, as I was saying earlier, it would most likely be biased towards adding a 3rd suffix, but maybe not, but we're just going to ignore that fact all in all, and we're just going to assume that there's a random suffix here, which is whatever it is, right? Now, at that point, what you would do is you would craft on suffixes cannot be changed, which is a prefix, and then you would essentially reforge crits. Now, this would guarantee elusive. Now, the thing is, at this point in time, if you were to do this exact same craft, if you were to do this and it guarantees you crit, there's also a 10% chance that it is going to add 2 other prefixes that are random, right? Because there's whenever you pick up an item off the ground or whenever you use a chaos on an item, there's like a 10% chance that it gets 6 modifiers. Because there's 3 modifiers that are basically locked in, there's a 10% chance that you get to 3 prefixes. Now, if this happens and you get 3 prefixes, there is no recourse whatsoever. So you could end up with a pair of boots, which is going to have Onslaught, Tailwind, Elusive, no move speed, no life. Instead, maybe Rarity and 12 mana. Right? So the entirety of the currency that you spent getting to that point, where you basically have to elevate Tailwind on one base, elevate Onslaught on the other base, the Awakener's Orb, the cost of the Orb of Dominance to do the elevation, the cost of locking your suffixes and then reforging, all of that currency, if you get that 10% chance where you get 3 prefixes, well, guess what? It's over. Your craft is over. And the thing is, this applies to literally every single item in the game. Because pretty much every single item in the game, which is considered an above average item, like something that's actually worthwhile to craft, is at some point in the crafting process going to have a point where you're going to use reforges. Okay, let's look at another example. For example, an Omniscience Ring, right? Omniscience Ring, you're going to start with a Fractured modifier or with a non-Fractured modifier, doesn't really matter. Then you're going to Essence spam to get the last attribute modifier. Then you would have 3 attributes. Then for the prefixes, you would craft on suffixes cannot be changed, and then you reforge life. Now, the idea is that you do this until you have a decent amount of life, then you craft on suffixes cannot be changed, and you ashling for 50-50. And then if you keep the life, right, and you get an veil modifier, you can craft mana and unveil it. You're basically guaranteed some flat elemental damage, and then you can craft on the non-channeling, and you're good to go, right? It's deterministic, it's still expensive, but it's doable, and anybody who wants to do it can do it as long as they put in the time. Now, here's how it goes. You spam essences until you get the second attribute modifier that's missing. Now you have 3 attributes as your suffixes. Then what you do is you craft on suffixes cannot be changed, reforge life. Guess what? If you get life leech or physical leech is life or whatever on your prefixes paired with 12 mana and I don't know, 16 lightning damage to attacks, that's it, right? All these essences that you spent in order to get your suffixes done, well, guess what? It's over. You got to go back to essence spamming, right? So it means that the quality of items, and not even just the quality, but the possibility of actually crafting these items is basically going out the window completely. Anytime that you need to use either a reforge, a veiled chaos, or any sort of system which is going to potentially give you 3 affixes, you're done. Now you could say, oh, that's okay. I never needed this flat elemental damage. Instead of doing a reforged life, which is first off more expensive but also less consistent, what I could do is get my 3 suffixes, then craft on suffixes cannot be changed, and hit it with a veiled chaos orb, right? Well, yeah, you could do that, but then a Veiled Chaos Orb is no different than a Reforge because it's a Chaos Orb in essence, right? It can still fill up your prefixes. And the moment that it fills up your prefixes, guess what? There's nothing you can do. Not only is there nothing you can do, if your prefixes are full, it means that you can't craft the block, which is mana, on the bench, so that when you unveil, you're not even going to be guaranteed to get life on your ring, which means that guess what? You have to go back to essence spamming. This is horrible. This is horrible for people who actually like to min-max their build, but it's also horrible for the top 20, 30, maybe even 40% of people who like to actually not even just min-max their build, but who like to actually learn about all of these intricacies of crafting and the depths of crafting in order to make their character stronger without having to go to, you know, PoE trade and buy upgrades, because it feels really good to craft your own items. It's not just a question of player power, but it's a question of feeling like you're actually doing something, right? And you're actually progressing as a player in the game and understanding the depths that the game has to offer. Now, this entirety of depth that was offered via crafting is completely thrown out the window. Your goal now, essentially, the only thing that you can consider endgame crafting is, well, I'm going to get a fractured item. I'm going to throw some essence at it until I get something half usable. And then I'm going to basically craft on a modifier on the bench, and that's going to be my item. Now, don't get me wrong. These items are still going to be plenty enough for you to be able to clear all the content. You never needed a perfect item to be able to clear all content in the game. Matter of fact, you can take a 10x build and clear literally all content in the game. All the Uber bosses, all that stuff. Because it's not gear related, it's skill related. If you know what you're doing, you can do all of the most endgame content on some pretty trash tier gear, right? So why does it matter that we can no longer actually craft these items? Well, the reality is that it means that there's no reason for us to make currency. What's the point of making currency if there's nothing to spend it on? There's no currency, there's no actual currency sink. There's no sort of replayability. There's no replay loop where you do something in order to earn currency, then you spend all the currency crafting to then, so that then you want to farm again because you're broke and you want to keep crafting. So you got to play to make more currency so that you can keep crafting. This replay loop is what actually makes the game, like, what actually gets people to play for endless amounts of hours, right? If you cut that out of the game and all that's left is essentially all can go running T16 maps with maybe 1 or 2 scarabs with very, very minimal juice, don't get me wrong, that's still fun, but is it going to be fun for 90 days? Is that actually going to keep you interested in the game for 90 days? No, it's essentially becoming Diablo 3. You're going to basically rush to the end game, right? You're going to play for like 3-4 days. And now when I say that, I'm talking about the more advanced players. They're going to play for 3-4 days, and then they're going to realize, well, there's nothing to do for me anymore. I got my mage blood. I can't craft anything. There's no currency sink. I'm out, right? And then what's going to happen is there's going to be a rippling effect to the people under these people and so on. And even if you're a casual player and you're like, well, fuck them. The 1%, we don't care about them. The reality is that that is going to drastically decrease your ability to actually enjoy playing the game if you're playing in Trade League. Now, for the people who are in SSF, that's a completely different story, but the game isn't balanced around SSF, and the vast majority of players are Trade League softcore players. And for those people, even if they think that none of these have any effect on them, they are sorely mistaken, and give it a week or two, and you're going to start really feeling the burn of the fact that the entirety of the 1% have quit the game. All right, anyways, that's pretty much it for this video. Hopefully this gives you a little bit of a better understanding of why crafting is actually dead in Path of Exile, and it's a very, very shameful thing. All right, before I go though, I want to say a huge thank you to my supporters. So the 3 Alexes: Skady, Bird, Bearded Ape, Brandon, Gustavo, Tim, Domo, Same, Desu, Miss, Jarl, Loophole, Mercury, Nate, Patrick, Rascola, Rocky, Solomon, The Great Master, Thomas Mass, as well as Maestro, Nailed, Ven, Bitizen, Nectarion, Noi, Xephion, and Larsis. For those who don't believe me, be sure to come back to this video in like 2 weeks and let me know how it feels to play a completely dead league with absolutely no players. All right, boys, that'll be Matthew signing out. Until the next one, peace.